Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from us in Nairobi and to you from where you're watching this conversation from. My name is Telanderito. I work with Dada Power Initiative where we work with young women and teenage girls on issues to do with civic duties and sexual reproductive health rights. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a looming crisis, a reproductive health crisis that needs our urgent action. If we did not know how undercapacitated and under-equipped our health systems are, then COVID-19 has taught us all how it is. And if that was not enough, we are staring at another catastrophe, and we need to talk and act. Welcome to the Baby Time Bomb discussion, where we seek to discuss solutions to the emerging and existing reproductive health issues. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation where we have expert conversations and youth voices from across Kenya. We know young people are engaging in consensual and transactional sex to survive, and we also know that this has repercussions: unplanned pregnancies, unsafe abortion in a country where abortion is illegal, and not to mention the disruption that it causes to the lives of teenage girls and young women's lives. So how do we plan ahead? How do we reduce unplanned pregnancies? Let's have an honest conversation. This discussion is being recorded, and we ask all of you to share your comments and questions on the chat box or raise your hand. And to start us off this conversation, I'm pleased to welcome Conrad Mochu, a communicator, a people's person, founder and CEO of the Lesi Company, where they tell amazing stories to start us off. Karibuni sana and karibu Conrad.
Hello, everyone, and today I am extremely honored that we are receiving a lot of people who are joining us to listen to the youth voices and forge a solution to these issues. We have policy experts who have come from different sectors who are present in this webinar today. And I'm very happy that also government officials have come here to listen to what we are talking about, donors and also the larger non-profit sector. Thank you so much. I can see friends from the US, UK, and Canada. The time zones. You have braved the night to be able to catch up, to catch us on this. And people from Nigeria and South Africa, thank you so much for joining us. And let me put some context into this issue. And it all began in March when COVID-19 struck. And the government put very stringent measures to curb its spread. So there was the partial lockdown that most of us knew as cessation that brought a lot of confusion and anxiety. And as communicators, we began to ask ourselves, if we are feeling this, then how are the youth truly coping during these times of uncertainty? How are they processing fear? How are they projecting it? And how are they dealing with boredom? And to establish this, we decided to invite young adults between ages 18 and 24 to Zoom calls to just hear them out. And by our third Zoom call, we had met over 200 young adults from Nairobi, Nakuru, Nyeri, Machakos, Kisumu, and other parts of Kenya. And we established a consistent thread in all calls that young adults are engaging in increased risky sexual activities to cope with stress and boredom, and also to survive economically. Sadly so. So, while this sort of thing is normal for young adults, many of us told us that for them it was remarkably higher than normal. And they admitted to a lot of sex which was unprotected and unsafe. And they were saying like tutadu, which is the Swahili word of what shall we do? So they wondered in apprehension. And our job is to support social sector organizations like government and non-profits to communicate uniquely and with high impact. So we reviewed what communications campaigns have been running during this period in all platforms, and we found out that the media was largely muted. So these young adults were doing their thing without a voice telling them, hey guys, slow down, just think a little. And the conversations that have been prominent in media have evolved around sexual crimes, like rape and sexual exploitation, especially in the family. But these crimes too, honestly speaking, needed to be exposed. But there was a blind spot. And the blind spot that we see is that there'll be a significant impact to the economy, to families and the society, arising from the significantly increased consensual yet sexual activities that these young people shared with us. So there will definitely be unplanned pregnancies and unsafe abortions to increase rates of sexual transmitted diseases. And there have been government surveys that have proven as much. And this truly was a red flag to us. So we asked ourselves, what can we do? So we decided to have a campaign on the issue online, and we reached over 300 young people, more people on social media, who largely confirmed what we are hearing. So we wondered if you policymakers and experts, the stakeholders who engage with the youth, knew about these challenges. So we saw an opportunity for us to meet with you and learn from you and establish how we can be helpful. And that's why we have the youth, we have policymakers, we have the government here, so that we can be able to discuss these things and see the problem and also find the solution. And with policymakers with us, of course, and government, you are able to guide the process from here going forward. And at this point, I wish to play the youth voices so that I can set the context to our conversation here before I turn it over to Stella and Derito. So at this juncture, allow me to play the youth voices.
As for me, I have a coil. Right now, I think I'm starting to wonder, does it even work? Because if anything was to go wrong in the next 9 months,
right,
I'll be welcoming someone I had not even planned for. So, yeah, I think being idle increases more. Like, people tend to just have a lot of sex.
Mm-hmm.
I think this period I've had so much sex than ever before.
Yes, this is my experience. Wacha tumwambie huko nje. Demu yangu endi job. Mimi si uko job pia. So tutafanya nini? Tumeona movies zimetosha na kuna mabuti short hapo kila saa. So sisi kwa namaje ina come through tu, yani naturally tu, hata hakuna tena tuna plan, tunafikiria every time. Every time. Yes, so ndio tu pass time vizuri, tuna exercise, unaona, kwa kitanda.
Hakuna vile mnaweza niambia ati sasa tukule nini? Unakulaje ndizi ikiwa na maganda yake? Ndizi unatoanga maganda ndio unakula, ama sweet huwezi kula ikiwa na karatasi, utasikia utamu wake. Hata pia God akitengeneza Adam na Eve, alikuwa anajua sex kwa natural. So ni nyinyi mjipange na safe days, mjue venye put out, mjipambe.
Bea alifungiwa huko Kisii na mimi niko huko Nairobi. Ile time, yani una imagine tu wakati tu namtaka karibu ndio akubali na mimi. Kitu yenye nimekuwa kwa busy with ni kuchukua sheria mkononi. Watu wengi wanaita kunyonga, kwa kizungu inaitwa masturbation. So tumekuwa tukifanya hiki kitu sana, but jirani yangu ameitwa form. So na mimi singekataa. Nilichukua nikafanya ile kitu.
Me hapa actually nilitoka home kwa Mare nikaenda kwa boy wangu. We've been doing things as a normal couple, going out, fucking and having fun. So mimi sioni kitu imechange hapo. Hakuna kitu imeaffect hadi.
Kulingana na mimi. Anze life imekuwa tamu, hii maisha ni rahisi. Inaona ni kama imekuwa rahisi kwangu. Watu wasibadilishe hii mtindo, inanibamba mbaya. Mimi na demu yangu tumekuwa sijui niseme tumekuwa tukiginyana, tumekuwa tukifaa, mimi sielewi, tumekuwa tukifaa mse. Have fun, imenibamba sana. So mimi ni less na I'm proud tumekuwa tukifanya hizi vitu kama kawa.
I kind of wanted to touch on the question that Asha had asked earlier about us guys having sex, and if after Corona things will be bad for some of us because maybe we made decisions about ourselves that we didn't want to make because things were bad. There was no food in the house, just the way Oliver is saying. Then we had to have sex so that we can get something on the table. This is something that happens so much in the ghetto. Like, literally, I think it happens each and every single day. I kind of feel like by the time this Corona is going down, by the time we are going back to the normal that we are used to, my friend, we are going to have Corona, baby. Ni kama tunaenda kuharvest manna from heaven. Alafu kitu kingine ujue tumeambiwa pregnancy ni by choice. So sahi niko sure wale wenye wanafikirianga kupata alafu wanakimbia to my stop. I am sure right now you will be told to give 5,000 even if it's free. They will tell you that because they know you don't have it but you're desperate. You want to get rid of a mistake that you've done. Our parents will be frustrated after all this. But now sasa unapata kwa wiki watu wawili wamekuja wamesema wamepata bahati mbaya. Tena wanasemanga hivyo, bahati mbaya, nimepata, nitafanya nini? We're going to have children that we've not planned for. The sooner we realize that this thing is serious and getting out of it inaenda kukua shida, or maybe it will take time, or well, of course, it will take time for us to get out of it. So this thing is kind of really messed up.
So, my friends, I just wanted us to sample a few voices, and what you have heard is straight from the so-called horse's mouth. So there are so many stories we could have played, but for time constraints, please, let's work with the 10 that we have played right now. And I wish us a very fruitful conversation, and at the end of it, some definitive action from us all that will impact this youth positively. Stella, over to you.
Thank you so much, Conrad, and indeed interesting, real conversations from young people. Maybe just to make us understand all these experiences and voices being shared by young people, what a better person to share that with us other than Kennedy Odede. And so who is Kennedy? Kennedy is a renowned community organizer and social entrepreneur, co-founder and CEO of Shining Hope for Communities, which is well known as SHOFCO, that aims to eradicate extreme poverty in urban slums by empowering communities to participate actively in their own transformation and harnessing their collective voice to advocate for change. And Kennedy wears many hats. He's bagged so many firsts and awards. First, he's a co-author of a book called Find Me Unafraid, which is co-authored with his wife and business partner, Jessica. And he's also won the 2010 Ecoing Green Fellowship, the Forbes 30 Under 30, and the 2010 Dell Social Innovation Competition. And he's a member of the Clinton Global Initiative. Kennedy, karibu sana to the conversation. Start us off by telling us, what do we make of these young people? First of all, we know that this is consensual sex. Ni ya kujitakia, they've given their consent, yeah? They talk about unsafe sex, unprotected sex, safe days, when we know that we can have a whole conversation about that, they say that they're actually having it every day, whether there's COVID or not. So what do we make of this, Kennedy? What more do we need to understand, and where are they coming from?
Thank you so much, Stella, for the introduction. I also want to thank Conrad for bringing this together. I'm looking at an amazing experts that I admire so much. So thank you. So really, I was thinking about today, and I heard the voices of the young people. It's really interesting, the way they think. I don't have much experience, truth be told, but how I can relate with this, Stella, is that growing up in Kibera, I was a street boy at the age of 10. At around 15, when I was 15 years old, I came with this idea of starting Shofco. I was a teenager, so I can just talk about a little bit of the past tense, what I learned on that step, And I was really into drugs. I did a lot of horrible things, and an empty mind is the workshop of the devil. I believe that strongly. And then I also saw a lot of what's called peer pressure. You know what I mean? I was really scared of HIV/AIDS growing up because my neighbors died from AIDS. But I was forced by the peer pressure that there's no woman coming to my house, no girl, So I remember playing this game, like, I don't want to, I'm scared of AIDS, but let me talk to these girls. They come to my house and make people feel like I have a girlfriend, So that's called peer pressure, really, I did that. I'm like, and you realize something. I really seen, even coming with Shofco, the idea of paternalistic viewpoint, controlling people. Youth don't want to be controlled. They want to be free. And I felt like nobody understands us. People are telling us this. For a good example, Stella, is when I'm like, these AIDS can be prevented by condoms. And then nobody told us how many condoms. I don't want to be too crazy. But so I saw my friends who are like using more than one condom. You see, there is confusion of information. Then, don't forget that I was a youth leader in our church. The church says this: community is happening. No sex before marriage. Adolescence, your body, all those things, So, honestly, I really feel for young people. I get it, a little bit of that, So what happens to people like me is like, church says this, and this is the reality on the ground. And so what's happening now? You will get confusing information, and there is no trust. And the youth and the teenagers are like confused. What is the right direction? So I feel the first step you have to see is that what Conrad has done, for example, today is that before we started, we were able to listen to the voice of the teenagers. I think that's the first step. The second step, we have to ask ourselves a question. Right now, we don't want politics, honestly. Right now, we don't want pro or choices, whatever. No. We want to ask ourselves as a nation, do we have a reproductive health crisis? Simple. Yes or no. And then from there, I believe that is yes. I have some data. According to Shofco health clinics that we have in Kibera, for the past 3 months, we got 200 teenagers who are now pregnant. The one we only know who come forward. What's going to happen? If there's a crisis, what's going to happen next? We see that we all believe that an educated woman is a powerhouse and it's going to help the entire community. I believe that strongly. When a woman is educated, they make the right choices. So, right now, I'm scared that we are taking away these girls from school. For the next 9 months, they will be out of school. What is that looking for the government? What is that looking for the country? We are losing a generation that could be like people like us, the society. So once we agree there's a problem, and then the third thing we have to ask ourselves, like, we cannot, and I love this from Conrad, we cannot put the boys aside. We need them too. We cannot go away with our community, churches, mosque. And I think what we have to do now is a right moment to be like, let's not talk about our beliefs. It's be like, kuna shida, which means, is there a problem? And then we all agree, Pastor, there's a problem in our Kibera community, Madare, in our village. What do we do about this? You see? And then we have to find solutions from them. They also have to listen to us. And then we realize, okay, there's a problem now. So we want to listen the voices of the young people, of the teenagers. What do the teenagers want? Right now, honestly, I'm a little bit still not that young, but I'm taken away by the language of Swahili that, Yamcha. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? It's really going too fast. You know what I mean? I have the word helmet, all those things. So I feel we really need to really understand and listen to the youth. But also you have to challenge ourselves. There's something I don't get the answer. I want my panel to think about it. If it's true this, schools are closed, then where is our parents? Where is our guardians? What is this happening? What is going on? Because
Kennedy, actually somebody, Moshiri asks, where is the role of parenting in all these so-called crises? Why do we focus so much on the victims, that is children and teenagers, and not really address the role of parents? So perhaps you can address that as you say what you are saying about parents.
Good, thanks so much, Moshiri, and thanks Stella for bringing up. So I was just thinking about this, like, okay, if schools are closed, and according to my experience, there is no much job because of Corona. For the past few months, people have been in the house. So what is going on? Are you just watching TV 24 hours? Do you sit down with your daughter? Do you sit down with your son? Let's talk about these things. You know what? And the more you think about these things, I love our African culture. I'm an African man. I love it. But if you think, I travel a lot. I went to US. I went to school there. And the pregnancies in this country is down. And I asked myself, Kennedy, what is this? And I'm like, So one day I had a family having dinner time talking about hard stuff for me. I'm like, oh God, I'm an African. What is going on here? So in my family, I don't want my mom to hear me now. She can use Zoom, so it's okay. Is that we live in Kibera in a 10 by 10. Tell you those who know 10 by 10. We are almost 6 of us, children. You want to tell me that we don't know what is happening? And nobody is talking about it. You are traumatizing your children, truth be told. So your children something called kalongolongo. I don't know if kalongolongo get kalongolongo. Kalongolongo is pretending to be daddy and mommy outside with other children. It can be the bush, it can be by the road, you know what I mean? And you're trying to play what is happening. You see? So we have to speak the truth. What is sex? They should know what is sex. People are telling their children, their teenagers, we're going to buy a baby, they'll start. I mean, okay. And then one day they're going to find out. You see? So we have to change our way of communicating to our children. And the role of the parent and the guardian is to speak the truth, is to understand these issues. So I think I've just asked a question of a little bit of what is if we have a crisis in reproductive health, and we agree on that. I also added the idea of let's not do politics. I believe the government, your government official here, the government also want the best for this country. So instead of fighting, we all want the best. We all want the best. How can we do that? It's by uniting together. You know what I mean? And do we also have existing interventions? I think so. And I believe this can come from the youth. Youth, what do you want? Teenagers, what do you want? I mean, no, we need to listen to them more and to see. And the last one is about the behavior change. I feel like behavioral change is very important. You know what I mean? How do you change the mindset? You know what I mean? But still, I believe for me is education. Education is everything. And what makes me so sad now is that this crisis is killing our education. It's killing our future president. It's killing our future ministers. It's killing our future parents. You know what I mean? So it's sad. So if we can start thinking like that and we all combine together, we can have a solution. And I believe also solution also, each slum, each village is different. You know what I mean? So anyway, Stella, I think I don't want to talk too much, but I think that's my message. It's high time we listen to the young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. And we'll definitely come back to you on some questions. I can see people are still sharing their comments. But let's just get into a conversation with Julie and Rosemary on what you're saying about interventions. And at this point, I'd like to introduce to us Julie and Rosemary. Julie is passionate about redefining the narrative for women and girls and is currently a gender advisor at the Office of the President. She's driven to significantly and positively impact the lives of women and girls through influencing policy. She's currently working on a national study exploring the impact of COVID-19 on adolescent girls. Karibu sana, Julie. Rosemary is currently coordinating and managing 6 projects in 16 counties. She's a self-motivated team player committed to creating demand for and access to reproductive health information and services for young people and securing their right for a brighter future. She is a public health specialist and social worker with over 20 years experience in community health and experience in project management, stakeholder engagement, community mobilization, and linkages. Karibuni sana, ladies. And to start off, we've heard Kennedy talk about, it's about behavior change. It's about the mindset. It's about engaging young people and asking them what they really want. And I see Angela Nguku say that these young voices are just resonating with what we had last year during the What Women Want campaign. I'm actually part of that campaign. These guys are asking for the information They're sexually active, they're doing trial and error methods, and our society must change tact and drop these hard stances that are currently being perpetuated. Listen to the voices and respond accordingly. Julie, so one would then ask, what are some of the working existing initiatives that are dealing with this increased sexual activity amongst young people, and are they really adequate?
Hi, Stella, and thank you for having me. So, in a government perspective, this is how I see it. There are lots of policies. I don't think Kenya, we are short of policies. You have the, Plan for Action for Children, Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy. I know there's a mental health management policy. I mean, we have a myriad of policies. So that is not the issue. The issue is, number one, from where I sit, you see a lot of policies are very siloed, right? So it can be led by a sector. It could be Ministry of Health leading one, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Protection. But then when you look at, I know you're talking about age 18 to 24, but if I took you a bit further, lower and say 10 to 19, talk about adolescent girls. They're not necessarily fully fall under children, so they wouldn't be under the Ministry of Social Protection, fully. They're not women, so they're not really, sort of handled with policies that are directed for women. So they tend to sort of fall through the cracks, and they're subsumed in discussions that are for children and women, and their issues are not really highlighted. And like you said, their voices are not being heard. There's, like I said, I don't believe there's one sector intervention that could work. We cannot look at their reproductive health and say, let's give them access to contraceptives, yet they're not being fed, they're not getting food, they're not getting, and right now, like you look at, them being home, where they're not in school, schools are safe haven for them before. They were able to access, they get their education, they're getting their food, they're getting their sanitary pads, and right now they're not. So one of the things, like you mentioned earlier, we're working on a study looking at the impact of COVID on adolescent girls. And this is a national study. We've done Nairobi, Wajir, we're doing Kilifi, Kisumu, we're going around the country. And a lot of what's coming out is transactional sex. A lot of them are saying, look, I'm having it because my family right now is going through an economic crisis. We need the money. I cannot go and ask for pads right now. It's a list of their worries. But if I'm able to get, money from somebody, I'm doing it. So there's an increase in sexual, in transactional sex. There's an increase, and a lot of them are also hungry, basic needs, I hear, the voices you're saying, and those are such tragic and hard voices to hear. But for many, it's also just survival. So that's the kind of thing we're doing, looking at the policies. How can we integrate them? How can we coordinate? How can we, different ministries, work together? So that if we're looking at reproductive health, how do we ensure that, education is part of it, so that we are not really working as siloed interventions?
Julie, I read an article that you've written about some of the social mechanisms that help teenage girls and young women, I think even teenage boys and young men, in terms of dealing with being idle and routine. And so now they've actually turned to sexual activity. So in this time of COVID, where schools are closed, people are at home, people have not changed roles, how do we create working social mechanisms that work for us and help us tackle this issue to avoid unplanned pregnancies and what we're talking about as reproductive health crisis?
Well, I know different, I cannot speak necessarily for the different ministries, but, one of the things is, how do you ensure that they're still able to access reproductive health services in this time? A lot of things they were able to access in schools, they can't do that anymore. So how do we ensure that we are creating access points? Is there a way that we can work with head teachers that even if schools are closed, is there a day that it can be open, like a Friday, where they can come in and still, practice social distancing, still come in, get the care, whatever they need. When we think about the teenage pregnancies we are talking about, we are also not seeing in the clinics antenatal care, right? We are not seeing, everyone is really scared of going to hospital. So most people are not going if they don't have to. So there's a lot of, girls are missing their antenatal care. They're missing, so you're not able to pick up these issues. You're not able to pick up STIs and STDs and treat things that have been treated earlier. So those are the things that, we need to find ways of allowing access, creating the information that you are able, you should be able to go to a hospital and get the care you need, go to, schools are closed, but is there a way, head teachers association, can we come together and say, let's allow a certain point, pickup point, or so that they're still getting their counseling, they're still getting their testing, they're still getting access to the services they need. And then also education. How do you keep them occupied at this time? What are some of those things? Is it the digital, we have the digital, for places that have the digital access, what kind of programming can you ensure that they're able to access in this time? I know it's, everyone was caught flat-footed with this, but still we just have to get ahead of it and find the solutions and find ways of working as we move forward.
Finally, Julie, is it something that we are looking to work on? For instance, is it something that the Office of the President is working to start working with head teachers, since it's actually one of the most, what can I say, it's nearer to the people, the proximity between schools and families, as something that we can realistically talk about. So, and when do we maybe most likely see it start?
So from where we work, what we are looking at now is the data. Until we have the data, we cannot come up with the interventions are led by evidence and the data. So like a lot of you are saying, what do you need? And the study we are working on right now, it's really going down to the questioning is the adolescents, the young people themselves. It's, we are asking them, what is working? How are you mentally? What are you getting your source of education? Are you eating? Are you feeling safe? What does it know? Those kind of things. So I think until we have that data and we can present this to the multiple stakeholders, we can present this to the different, ministries and saying, look, this is what the young people are saying. This is what, the data we have, and these are some of the cost of intervention that we believe will move this forward, because we cannot work like we were before. COVID has changed so much. So if you're going to use old strategies right now, they're not going to work. So how do we use new strategies? How do we evolve? How do we work fast? How do we listen to the young voices? How do we involve them? How do we how do they validate the responses and validate the action that we are moving forward?
Thank you so much, Julie. And Rosemary, to come to you now. We've talked about all these things, and especially listening to what young people are saying. And maybe if I was to read some comments we have now, from Angela, she says, we better stop living a lie and face it. We have a crisis. Many stakeholders must come together. Unity of purpose, parents, young people, both boys and girls, churches, government, community leadership, communities, media, religious factions, and local administration. And then Sharon says, we need to know we live in different times. The youth are more exposed and they know more about sex than we do, but very little about the consequences. And that's where we as parents come in. We need to dialogue. We have come across, this is Anne, we have come across girls as young as 8-9 years get pregnant. What data, Julie? Yeah, there is so much data lying all over the place. I think that we can also have Caroline and Maggie talk about. But Rosemary, what are some of the, as a public health specialist and having worked with different stakeholders, where are we missing the link? What are we not doing? And when it comes to best practices, where can we borrow from while still contextualizing our realities in Kenya?
Thank you very much, Stella. I like what I'm hearing, and listening to the voices of the young people, I really empathize with them, because one thing that is a fact is that young people are having sex and they're going to continue having sex. However, there's the part that we play as adults and mentors, the community, and all the stakeholders that we are referring to. And this is where now information becomes very important to these young people. As Julie rightly put it, our policies are lumped together. We have young people where we talk about 10 to 24. We have adolescents where we talk about 10 to 19. We have youth where we talk about 15 to 24. But remember that the level of this 10-year-old in understanding SRH is definitely not the same with the level of a 19-year-old. And that is why we endeavor at DSW to have projects and programs that are targeted. We have a project we call Young Adolescent Action Project, and it targets 10 to 15 in school, and particularly on SRHR. And we want to mentor these young children as early as possible and give them information to be able to make wise decisions when they're out there. We also work with the parents. Why? Because these children go back to the community, they go back to homes. And so these parents, we have mentor parents who peer other parents to be able to understand the dynamics around an adolescent's life. An adolescent is going through a volatile period. They are neither children, neither youth, if I may call it, they are neither adults, they're in between, they are lost. And so they need a lot of guidance, and guidance can be given through information. Are they able to access information, whether they be in school or they be at home? If the government is able to conduct education during these COVID times virtually, can't we still do the same for SRH information for young people? Because they're at home, they're listening, they have mobile phones, we've bought for them, they're listening, they're Googling, they're learning. But what are they learning? They have information that Google has ready for them. They have information that their peers have for them. And they have information that they think is what is right. But it is us who know what is right that we need to give them that information. We cannot pretend that they're not having sex. They are having sex and they will have sex. But do they even have access to SRHR services for that matter, especially in these COVID times? They're idle, they're at home. As parents, we are used to having our children away in school while we say we are looking for money to pay for their fees and everything else. So when they stay for long periods at home, we kind of don't know what to do with them. That is where now we lose it. we must know what to do with our children and to give them information. In this day and age, Stella, we still have parents who still shy of discussing SRH matters with their children. And as elite as they are, as young as they are, they still cannot talk about it with their children. And so what happens? The children look for that information through those mobile phones that we have bought for them. We are at home with them. We come home, we are busy, we are on our phones, they're on their phones. We do not know what they're discussing. We don't know where they're watching porn. And at that age, watching porn makes them even more livelier. Their hormones are active and alert. They will want to explore. They will want to adventure. And so there's nothing you can do about it. But when we have given them information, then we hope that they will make wise decisions. Behavior change is purely an intrinsic thing. However, it can be influenced by extrinsic factors. And these extrinsic factors include access to information, access to peer influence that is positive, community, the surrounding community. When we were growing up, we had the community to it was like providing checks and balances. You're running to the shops, you're stopped by a boy, he spanks you. There's a mother who is not even your mother, who is there ready to spank you and rebuke you. So you have your checks and balances. But today you cannot do that to somebody's child. And so children are left at the expense of their phones, Google, and their peers. And so the government has to step up. And instead of talking about wanting evidence in terms of data, to watch the red flags. Recently, numbers were floated in the media, and we heard that about 152,000 young adolescents across the country were reported pregnant. This was disputed. For me, I felt instead of disputing, let's talk about the red flag and see why somebody is saying that we have increased numbers of young children getting pregnant. Stella, even amidst the COVID-19, sexual reproductive health needs do not pause. They don't pause. The needs continue. And so we must address them.
Yeah. So maybe as we finish up, Rosemary, I'd like to ask, what's the right age to start talking to kids about sex? Since we're saying it's important and probably our culture does not help us get used to that, yet our culture, still in this whole culture, people are having sex. So what's the right age to start talking about it to children?
I think there's no right age and wrong age. It just depends, because whatever information you're giving, whether it be to a 2-year-old, to a 10-year-old, to a 19, it must be age appropriate. I remember when we were growing up, we could ask our mother when she comes from maternity, when she's pregnant, okay, what's in your stomach? Then the answer was age appropriate. And although at that time you were told the child is being bought, but as you moved on, mommy came home with a child. Where did this child come from? At that point, children today are very inquisitive. They will ask. Give them information at that time when they ask, honestly, but in an age-appropriate manner. Do not start telling them something else, because they're asking you what they have heard. So they just want to see whether they're saying the truth or not.
Yeah. What countries have hacked this whole situation? What do they do? What are the best practices we can borrow from such? Is there a country that does not have this issue, or maybe as huge as it is here in Kenya?
From where I sit, this is a global problem. It's a global problem. Young people are young people, whether they are from the US, they are from UK, wherever they come from, they are young people. The needs are just the same. Just the levels and dynamics are different, but the needs are the same. And the approaches to supporting them, again, will just still be the same. Either it's community, parent, church, government, it is all the same.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Julie, there's a question for you about the president's crackdown on clinics selling contraceptives to adolescents and young people. And Gaetano was asking, doesn't that then lead us to what we are trying to reduce, unplanned pregnancies? And what probably informed the president's directive on that, even though it's not very clear? The conversation seems to be a bit silent.
I can't comment on that because, I mean, obviously that was a directive on his end.
Yeah.
But then, you know, like I said earlier, it's when you look at, you know, reproductive health, it's coming from different angles. You have the education, you have, you know, there's the church, there's the moral side of things, there's the health side of things. So sometimes, and most times, you know, approaches are not the same and people like to look at things differently. And so, I mean, it's something I can get back to you on, but I am not able to comment on what informed that policy.
Yeah, all right, thanks, Julie. Rosemary, perhaps you can share, you can maybe comment on this from Moshiri, who says, what is more dignified, to give a girl a pack of sanitary pads worth 50 bob a month in the presence of saving them from being impregnated or in exchange for pads, or empower her mother or parent to save 10 bob every day to afford even better quality pads and keep the dignity of their family? Leaders, especially women leaders, must focus on more sustainable ways of helping women and girls. And I think it's just the issue of priority, but then perhaps just to twist the question and say, how do we sustainably solve this issue? On one hand is the issue of economics, and on the other hand is just the issue of having a realistic conversation and decision about this is what I need to do to avoid unplanned pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Stella. When it comes to dignity and parents being able to provide for their young adolescent girls, for sure, if a parent can save a penny to buy for her daughter sanitary towels, then that would just be the right thing to do. Because like from the information we've seen on media and even from the clips, the girls are talking about engaging in sex, being lured to consensual sex because of buying sanitary towels. Stella, how much does a pack of sanitary towels cost? You know? And we have the State Department for Gender had a school sanitary towels program. What happened to it in public schools? What happened to it? And as somebody said earlier on, policies are there, but how are they being implemented? Because the policymakers should have known that now that the children are not in school, we are not able to give them these sanitary towels in school. So what do we do so that we ensure that they still have their sanitary towels even when they're at home? So that's a gap for me. And so you find that these children, you can't also blame some of their parents, because that penny, the parent is grappling between whether to put food on the table for them or to buy the sanitary towels for them. So the parent is in a dilemma. And of course, naturally, since maybe there are 2 or 3 or 4, the parent would rather buy the food than buy the sanitary towels. Then what happens? This poor little girl goes out there, there's a boda man who lures her with 100 shillings. She's like, I'll get ashamed if I get spotted with my period. So I'll buy my sanitary towels. So we are also putting the young adolescents in precarious situations that we need to address.
Thank you so much, Julie and Rosemary. That was a great discussion, and we're definitely going to come back to you should we have any other questions. And I see so many comments about what data are we talking about. Is it that we don't have data on all these pregnancies, all these cases of abortion? And who better to explain all this to us than expert researchers and policy experts, that is Dr. Caroline Kabiru and Dr. Maggie Walker. Caroline is a senior research scientist at the African Population and Health Research Center, APHRC, leading the Population Dynamics and Reproductive Health Unit in Kenya. She has 15 years experience designing, conducting, and managing research projects in sub-Saharan Africa, focusing on adolescent health, sexual and reproductive health, and gender. She obtained her PhD degree in health promotion and behavior from the University of Georgia and has contributed to nearly 100 publications on adolescent health and well-being, sexual and reproductive health, and FGM, among other issues. And then Dr. Maggie Walker is a physician and global health specialist with 7 years experience working in the NGO sector and in youth advocacy around sexual and reproductive health issues. She currently works as a policy and research officer at the African Population and Health Research Center, IPHC again. Her current research and policy work looks at supporting policy actors in using evidence for policy and social change and addressing policy. Maybe I think I can start with you, Dr. Mwoka, because I've sat with you in a conceptualization workshop with WAPI, and just say that you had the youth voices. And people are saying that we have all the data that we need, and why are we not then talking about the things that we have? So on one hand, we have the issue of culture, and on the other, we have the data, and numbers don't lie. So how do we bring all this together and come up with policies that work for us? And I know we do have policies, so what exactly is the gap?
So thank you for the question. Thank you, Stella. And I'm really happy somebody brought up, that's Angela, I think, brought up that issue of data and evidence. And I'm also glad that Julie mentioned that they're actually currently conducting research. I think the policy to implementation gap and even the transition between evidence, what we have, and how it's actually being put into practice and policy continues to be a big issue. And I would actually agree with Angela to some extent that, yes, there is evidence. We have data out there. We have data that's already showing us that about 51% of new HIV infections occurs among young people 15 to 24 years old. We know that 1 in 3 young girls is pregnant or has already started childbearing, and those girls below the age of 18. We have also information that tells us that of all the births between adolescents account for, between aged 15 to 19, account for 14% of births in Kenya. And of those 14% of births, we know that 63% of them are unintended. So those are pregnancies which they did not want. And we know that of those pregnancies that were not wanted, that 35% end up in abortions. And so we have this information that tells us what the current situation is. However, and we even have information in terms of what evidence-based interventions actually work. And that's where the issue of contraceptives. We know that contraceptives can be a very key protective factor for adolescents and young people to reduce unintended pregnancy, STIs, including HIV. However, we often see that this can be reflected in policy, and that has been very clearly elaborated if you look at the National Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy. If you look at the Adolescent Package of Care, it clearly highlights that we need to provide sexual and reproductive health services, including modern contraceptives, to adolescents, and then there's no reason why we should not. However, we're seeing that in practice, that is not the same. So I think in terms of data, there is data, and organizations such as APHRC work on this information constantly. But one thing which is clear is that, and Julie mentioned this, is we look at young people as a homogeneous structure. However, and even if you, from the responses that we're hearing, we see that young people are very diverse. And we need to also make sure that we have evidence that looks at the diversity of young people, because we need to, and that's in terms of age. And rightfully put by Julie is that adolescence period, that period between 10 to 19 is one of the phases of life which is largely neglected and left behind. And we know as well that this is a phase of life whereby young people are starting to evolve. They're starting to now get more in touch with their sexuality. This is the age where experimentation is more, is increased, And therefore, this is the age which is basically, it's a very formative and transformative stage into adulthood. And sometimes what happens in this stage, in adolescent stage, will actually define your life much later on. However, we are failing even in policies. As much as we have these adolescent health policies, in terms of practice, we're seeing that it's not reflected that we are actually taking into account this very, very crucial and special population. And I think one other thing as well is, even just going beyond the data, is trying to understand. So I think this is where we need more work between researchers and policymakers, and conversations like this, which have been brought together thanks to Conrad and the team, whereby we have us, the researchers, who will bring in that evidence aspect, you, the advocacy partners, and the government representatives, to continue having such conversations, to be able to know what exactly is needed from us as researchers, so that even what we do is relevant to the work that you're doing, and it actually addresses the specific issues. And even having conversations with young people to make sure that whatever evidence is produced, that it actually responds to the actual needs and wants that young people have. And I think one of the key ways forward is trying to also include young people in programming and in terms of research, whereby they're not just seen as the people who will give us information, but they'll also be people who, together with them, who would be actually getting the information, we would be analyzing the information and interpreting the information together with them. And this is also an area that APHRC is starting to look at, how to involve young people in that regard. And I think more and more as well, we're realizing also as researchers, because sometimes the work that we do can just sit in publications, it has a lot of jargon, that also it's up to us to make sure that whatever we produce is user-friendly and can actually be able to be well understood from a wide range of audiences, and be incorporated more and more into decision making.
Thanks, Dr. Moka. Dr. Caroline, I mean, is it that we don't have enough data or generated evidence to show that we really are staring at a catastrophe and we need urgent action? And I think we all know what we need. Different stakeholders know what we need, but then there's the issue of conflicting positions to take. On one hand, civil society organizations are saying we need to act. We need to talk about contraception amongst adolescents. And then on the other hand, religious institutions, as if we look at the reproductive health bill, for instance, we know what the conversation has been. It's in other people saying that, you know what, this will introduce sex to children at a very, very early age. Yet we know that actually adolescents and young people are having sex, consensual sex. So what more do we need?
Thanks, Stella. And actually, for me, I actually take a different view. I don't think the crisis is beginning now. The crisis has been there. The pandemic has maybe brought it to the fore, because we know for a long time that teenage pregnancies were an issue, for example. We knew abortion was an issue. So these things have been happening. It's just that now with COVID, that it has now come to the fore. And I would say that perhaps for me, the most significant gap in promoting behavior change among young people, which is one of the questions you had posed in the email, is that we don't actually agree about what change we want to see. So it makes it very hard for us to take meaningful action. What do I mean? We don't want to teach young children and young people about sex because it will make them sexually active. We don't want young people to use contraception because only married people use contraception. And that was part of the message that was in the newspaper article that Gaetano talked about, that there was actually a message. It is not in any Kenyan law that minors access family planning health services, since planning is about those in legally recognized marital union. So you can see, even among us, we don't agree who should get contraception. We expect young people to say no to sexual advances, but we don't want to give them the tools that they actually need to say no. We want to settle rape cases outside the court system because we want to protect family honor. So we hear a girl has been raped. The parents did not want to take the case to court because it's a family that we know, so we'll settle it outside. And then we teach children and young people that sex is bad. Yet for me, I say the reason each of us are here, I mean, unless our parents took fertility treatment, are because two people had sex. So until we have that open conversation, we are very clear what we want and where we want to see the change happen, we're not going to move along. You had asked a question, is this unique to Kenya? Are there countries where this is happening and where there's an action taking place? And yes, there have been. And I think we need to take a step back and learn from other countries. The United Kingdom has historically had very high teenage pregnancy rates. And it took a forward-thinking government in the early 2000s to halve the teenage pregnancy rate. And they took about a decade. And what did they do? They had a clear goal. Our goal is to halve the teenage pregnancy rate. And how are we going to do it? We'll have a well-coordinated strategy. It is everybody's business. Whether I'm a teacher, whether I'm a parent, whether I'm in government, whether I'm a researcher, it's all our business. And our business is one, to reduce teenage pregnancy. And the plan was involved by, they reviewed the evidence, they had discussions with stakeholders, and stakeholders were everybody. Professional organizations, there were non-governmental organizations, there were young people themselves. And they realized if we're going to move ahead, it has to be executed by multiple actors in different sectors, which is what I think, looking at the charts, a number of people are saying it's everybody's business. So what were they doing? So there was, of course, the coordinated action at local and national level. And what they did is they created what they called a social exclusion unit. So it is addressing all the ways in which young people are disempowered and are put at risk for unwanted pregnancy. Then they enhanced sex and relationship education, which here we talk about comprehensive sexuality education, to make sure that young people have access to the information that they need. They also increased young people's access to contraception. Then they had a communication campaign through the mass media to encourage young people to resist peer pressure to have sex, to encourage them to use condoms, to encourage them to use contraception. And also importantly, which speaks to some of the comments that have been coming about, to encourage parents to talk to their children about sex. Yes, parents have a role to play, but it's not an easy conversation and we cannot assume that parents know what to say. They also need guidance. And then finally, there was the support to young parents to prevent the young people who are already pregnant, who are at risk for repeat pregnancy, to support them in various forms. And I think someone in the chats have also seen quite a bit of that. And all this was undergirded by evidence and learning. So as you're implementing, you're monitoring what you're doing, you're generating evidence to strengthen the way you're doing things. So in other words, it was a collective action. And so yes, Stella, there is an example out there that we can look at, and they've actually published their work. As Julie said, I think Kenya is already halfway there. We have so many policies, and when you read them, they're good policies. But what we lack, I feel, is an accountability system and strong leadership. If today the president was to say, our mission as a country is to have teenage pregnancy, it's everybody's business. If you're in the Ministry of Finance, if you're in the Ministry of Devolution, when we're talking about poverty alleviation, the reason girls are having sex for pads is because they don't have money. So poverty alleviation is also part of that solution. It's not just in the health sector. It's not just in the education sector. It's everywhere. So for me, I do feel that this is a good conversation. And when I read all the chats that are going on, the solutions are already even in the participants who are seated around the table. So yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I think we've answered so many questions, especially on the issue of best practices and actually what we can learn from the UK. And you did mention that it's actually a leadership issue. I come back to you, Caroline, to ask, what are the gaps in strengthening behavior change? What do we now need to do? Now that we know some of the best practices, what are some of the gaps in behavior change?
I said it's just that we haven't identified what it is we want. Once we are very clear in our mind what we want. So do we want young people to have information about their sexual and reproductive health? Then we cannot continue fighting CSE, which happens all the time. Do we want young people who are having sex to use methods that prevent them from having unintended pregnancy? Then we can no longer say that contraception is just for people who are married. Because we know, I mean, in Kenya, the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey data tells us by the age of 18, half of young people have had sex. And we know they're not having it within marital unions, yet we know we don't want them to have unintended pregnancy. We know what that means in the future in terms of schooling, in terms of a lifetime of disadvantage. So what is it we want to see? I think we want to see that young people and everybody is sexually healthy and that they are able to make the right decisions to prevent disease, to prevent unintended pregnancy. Once we're clear about that, then we can put in all the other measures and make sure that they are supported.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caroline. Thank you so much. Dr. Mwaka, I would like for you to also add your voice to the issue of the gaps in behavior change amongst young people when it comes to sexual activity.
Thank you for that. So I think Caroline has really put it very well. I think when it comes to behavior change, we need to consider, we always need to have the user or the persona that we're thinking of in mind. And I think we need to first always understand why is it young people behave the way they do. And conversations like what we've had is how we start really understanding. Because I think there's a very big notion that we know what they went through. We were there once, but we also need to understand that times have changed, dynamics have changed. So we need to always keep relearning, and that's what Caroline said. We need to keep relearning and learning. I think we need to take into account as well, when we're talking to young people, their diversity, their age differences, their context. We also need to consider very vulnerable populations, and that's, for example, the very young adolescents from 10 to 14, or young people living with disabilities who are also sexual beings, and we often tend to forget that. We also need to think about young key populations as well, and what it is that they're going about. And especially if you look at the HIV, the incidence of HIV, that even we know, if as much as we know that 51% of new infections are among 15 to 19, we know that majority of these are among key populations, which is also an issue which, because of, which is quite contentious, whether it's culturally and religious leaders are refusing to understand. Yet we know that is the situation. I think it's also important for us to understand, because by us understanding them, then we can be able to know what's their capability. And it's important for them to be able to know what can they do, when they should be able to do it, how to do it, under what circumstances, and why it's important. We need to be able to communicate that to them. And that's why comprehensive sexuality education comes in. I think in addition to that, and I think an area which we largely fail in terms of strengthening behavior change is, despite a young person, even let's say I'm a young person who fully knows all my sexual rights, all my sexual and reproductive health issues. However, is there a system to support me to actually effect this behavior change? Because behavior change is not just an individual thing. There has to be support structures around to be able to support that person. And that involves laws and policies. And we've seen how, when it comes to, for example, sexual and gender-based violence, we know that despite it being clear there's a Sexual Offences Act, despite it being clear that there's a minimum sentence for any person who is found to have sex with somebody below 18, that in most evidence shows that most cases judges provide the most minimum of sentences and not the full sentence that they're supposed to, that the perpetrator is supposed to go by, which of course sends a message that in the end, even if I was sexually abused, even if I put it ahead, nothing will happen. You know, and I think another aspect in terms of being able to provide that supportive environment is the idea of providing healthcare services. So that's the contraceptives, and I'm really happy that Gaetano brought in place that the crackdown story. We are taking away the one intervention that has high impact, that has shown to be very valuable in reducing unintended pregnancies. And I think one thing which has come about as well is, despite that, let's say, even if the government was to put in place and say that, which it has actually, there is a policy that clearly highlights that adolescents should be able to access contraceptives. However, you also find that when you go into the healthcare system, which is supposed to provide the services, that also becomes an issue. And research shows that majority of healthcare providers, one, don't even know what existing policies and guidelines are out there for adolescents. Two, they lack training in terms of how to be able to handle adolescents. And this brings in that issue of, they're not children, so they're not pediatrics, but they're also not adults. So you can't really put them under obstetrics and gynecology. So where are they? Where do you put them? And then you also find that most of them have even mentioned that they're religious, their culture, and this keeps coming over and over, actually impedes their ability to provide modern contraceptives for young people. So I think when we're thinking about behavior change, we need to stop thinking in the short term, because I think largely programs are set up in the short term, where you would do a mass campaign, posters, and inform young people on a one-off basis or 2 months, and then that's it. But behavior change is a consistent, and it needs to be long-term. And for that to be in place, we need to have those supportive structures, and that is everyone's business, like Caroline said.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moka. And I'm actually coming back to you because we have a comment from Sandra, even as I ask all the panelists to prepare and give their parting shots. Sandra says, I'm finding this conversation very insightful. I'm curious to know why adolescents aren't actively enabled to participate in SRH forums such as this. We need to connect the knowledge, evidence, and experience being shared by young people in their safe spaces with such policy conversations. Their voice and leadership in addressing early pregnancy and SRHR is so important. We are talking to ourselves. So perhaps Dr. Moka, and actually Conrad, perhaps you could also comment on this and tell us what's the way forward after this conversation that the LACI has started. But Dr. Moka, perhaps you can take us through briefly how you work in policy and research. Do you engage adolescents? And then how does that then lead to some of the policies that you work on?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think also Caroline can jump in here after I finish. So how we tend to usually do is, so for the research we do, in fact, one of the main areas that APHRC focuses on is on understanding the sexual and reproductive health needs of adolescents. And so how, and because adolescence is below age of 18, so that also usually tends to be, they're minors. So in some cases, when you're conducting research and you have to provide informed consent for adolescents on issues or to do research or ask them questions around sexual and reproductive health, that can sometimes be a barrier. However, we find that we've been able to engage with parents, we've been able to engage with adolescents, and in addition to just conducting research, I think one of the things which is also being done is we have sessions where we have researchers going to actually talk to adolescents and parents together about the issues, the findings which are coming up. So you could find that we've conducted a research, you have findings, this is what adolescents are saying, they want to hear from their parents or from their community. You bring those parties together, because I think it's also important that to not silo the different stakeholders, if I would say that. It's also important, as much as it's important to hear from each of them, that you also bring parents, you bring the adolescents together, bring the communities together, and create a safe environment whereby you can be able to use evidence, because at least evidence can be sort of a neutral a neutral ground, because it's facts. It's a neutral, it's objective, it's facts. And it can be a neutral ground to be able to start having these engagements. And I think now more and more also we're moving into trying to see how to also have peer-led research. So whereby you actually actively involve young people as researchers. So they're the ones who are, and not beyond that, you also want such that even as you start the research phase, in the designing and conceptualizing of it and identifying the problem, you want them to actually be part of that process, because we want them to be able to define and conceptualize that research. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moka. Actually, Caroline, I won't ask you about the same thing, because I can see a question from Pauline asking, now that we're talking about contraceptives, why don't we discuss the complications or the effects of contraception? Perhaps you could address that very quickly.
In terms of contraceptives and their complications, I think that's a very important question. And often what we hear is that every time young people complain about or give concerns about contraception, then they're labeled as myths and misconceptions. In some cases, yes, it's true, there are myths and misconceptions. But anytime we're talking about a contraceptive method, especially that's not a non-barrier or that's natural family planning, for example, it is a medication. And as you know, every medication has side effects. And young people need to be informed about each contraceptive, its benefits, its effectiveness or efficacy, and as well as some of the potential side effects. Because actually what you see is that a lot of time women and girls will use a contraceptive method, but will stop it because they can't deal with the side effects, and yet they don't know what else they should do. So I think a part of the comprehensive information that we give young people is really talking about contraceptives, their benefits, their cons as well, which include some of those complications or side effects, because it is an important reason. If you look at many of the people who are not using contraceptive at the moment, many of them have used it in the past. And what happened is that they experienced side effects that made it unfavorable for them to use. And so they discontinued its use. But then they perhaps did not get the sort of counseling that would enable them to take up another method that perhaps will not have those side effects. Yeah. So yes, I think it's an important question and something we need to be talking about.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much. You know, Conrad and the entire Lesi company, I feel that this is a conversation we cannot exhaust today. And before we get to hear some of the conversations and comments being shared online, let me just read a few comments that we have. I see Moshiri say, there seems to be deliberate campaign to promote contraceptives for the benefit of multi-billion-dollar international drug businesses at the expense of the teenagers' future health. These are the small prints that all of us must read. And then somebody says, if we're saying it's consensual and we know that having sex with children is illegal, what are we doing to the people doing it? Remember, this conversation was not just about children. This conversation was about young people, from the ages of 18 to 25 as well. So we also are discussing consensual sex. The fact that they're having sex does not mean it's right. Murders happen every other hour. Do we license potential victims to own guns for defense? No, we deal with the perpetrators. Again, that's an issue about having sex with minors. And I think that's actually supposed to be addressed separately because it's crime. One more, I'd say, from Paul, he says that comprehensive sex education is something agreeable to stakeholders, not just imported. We need to address economic problems and idleness. We need to empower parents first and foremost to be able to take up their roles. I think I'll stop it at that for the comments. There are so many. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating and sharing your views. And I'd like to also direct all of us to a link that Moshiri shared about comprehensive sex education for our information. Conrad, would we hear some samples from the online conversations?
Thank you, Stella. I think I would want to take some questions, allow some people to speak who have raised their hands.
Yeah.
So let me allow Kabura Mwangi. I'm giving you rights to be able to speak. Please talk. You can now talk.
All right. One of the solutions is communication and awareness campaigns, which we no longer have them. Why?
All right. Thank you, Kabura. Paul Otieno, I can see Wangoi Kamau, your hand is up. All right, let me allow you to talk.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Telesico and your team for this most important conversation about a very important social issue. So my take on this is I'm a bit worried that conversations about young people being pregnant end up with conversations on contraceptives. So I think that's it's a valid route, but I think it's only one of the options. So conversations about children and young people in general, because most of these people normally are either in high school or in campus, and it should involve education. It should involve contraception, it should involve parents, it should involve boredom, and it should also involve what the children or what the young people, let me not call them young people, although this also includes children, what they think of themselves and as how they are valued by society. So my case in point is, what does a young person think their value is? Their value, as has been communicated by the environment around them, which is their parents and church and everybody else. So for example, they think that their work or their value is in how they pass their exams, or their value is in how they help out at home. So now that they're not able to do these things, then they look for other alternatives for them for themselves, to seek value in other things other than what they are able to do at this point. So what I'm trying to say is there are many avenues and there are many reasons, and I feel like contraception is one of the conversations that we should have, but it should not be the only conversation that we should have when it comes to speaking about young people and pregnancy. We need to involve education, parenting, and all those other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Wangoi.
Okay, let me take one last one from, there are many. Let me take Victor Chiza, because our time is really up and we need parting shots from the way
hi
forward.
guys,
Chiza?
I'm Victor Chiza from South Africa. I only have few things to talk about. Like, for example, now NGOs have been doing a good job, but now they are doing it in a different way that we understand. And like, let's say, for example, in the slums, we understand Sheng. And the information that we're getting from the NGO is that about sex, it's not the way that we understand. Kwanza, kama tuseme hizi vitu ambazo tunatumia condoms, huku tunaita jwalas, socks, that language that our youths do understand. But vitu zenye tunapata, information tunapata, maybe hatu understand well because vile zinasemwa. Na ningeomba sana kama if that can be changed, ndio tuweze kuelewa sisi wenyewe huku mtaani, ndio tuweze kurelate nazo, one, and then maybe tunaweza anza ku make right decisions as youths.
Okay, thank you, Chiza. One last one. I know there are very many hands that have been raised. Let me just take the last one from Gaetano, then we can go back to the panelists. I'm really sorry if we will not be able to let you speak because our time is up, and I now see that these conversations need a lot of time, but again, we cannot keep talking the whole time. So let me invite Gaetano as the last person, and sorry if you did not get a chance to speak in this webinar for baby time bomb. Gaetano.
Hi, everybody. I'm loving the conversation that is taking place so far, and it's good that we are having these conversations. It's high time as stakeholders, both in non-governmental section plus the government, we come together and have real discussions. So the issue of whether young people need access to contraceptives, or the issue of whether young people need access to correct information. And when I talk about correct information on sexuality, I'm talking about comprehensive sexuality education. It's a matter that needs to have been settled a long time ago. When you look at the society right now, there are a lot of social developments that have taken place. When you listen to the kind of music that is going out there today, you'll even be sick with the kind of lyrics that come out of those music. So here we are, we don't want to provide young people with information on how to correctly use contraception. We don't want to provide young people with correct information on their sexuality, but we are allowing music filled with, lines that glorify sex in a way that misleads young people, playing in the airwaves, playing in the matatus, playing in our disco clubs, and we are saying that comprehensive sexuality education is going to make young people, have a lot of sex. So we need to actually realign our conversation so that we are as real with the situation as it gets. And then as stakeholders today, I just have a question. Now that we've come together, what are some of the things that we can agree on, that we can work on jointly to further this discussion? Because I believe it's a very heavy discussion, very valuable, that doesn't need just to stop here, but I would like also to see at the end of this discussion, what are some of the action steps that we can engage in as stakeholders to move forward, so that at the time that this bomb takes off, then we are prepared to contain it and, guide our young people in the right direction. Thank you so much, Conrad.
All right.
I think, Stella, you can take it up and get the panelists to summarize it.
Yeah.
And onto this conference and give us the way forward.
Yeah, I think what we will do now that we are wrapping up is we've had the conversation about we are still not there yet in creating sufficient awareness when it comes to comprehensive sex education, and also what are some of the things that we need to work jointly. How do we even address some of the music and some of the information that young people are consuming if we want to talk about this issue comprehensively? Allow me to read just 3 comments that have come in now. Wangoi Kamau says, social spaces help young people to keep themselves engaged. I think she's talking about the social mechanisms that we were discussing with Julie. And then Paul says, I think we need more time to discuss this. Let's not address the symptoms, but dig the root cause. And then parenting is not a democracy. We can't ask children what they want so that we provide for them. Instead, we provide for them what is right for them. I think we need to also talk about that. Where do we strike the balance between being a tough parent and being a realistic parent? And finally, I feel this discussion cannot be conclusive enough for action points. We need a conference for a whole day. I think that's for you, Conrad, and the team at the LACI. Yeah, so perhaps as we get the parting shot from our speakers today, please talk to us about, you can comment on those issues that I've mentioned as you tell us what's the best way forward. How do we work together? How do we address these issues in a realistic manner so that we are talking about sustainable development for everybody, including young people? And I think I'd like to start with you, Julie.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the comments, for what's going on in the chat. And it's true, it's such a wide topic. It's so much. And I think for me, what is encouraging is that these conversations are happening. As Caroline said, it's not a new crisis. It's been there. I think Kenya is actually considered third globally in teenage pregnancy. So we are really, really high, and this conversation really needed to happen. We need to continue with it. Something I noted, of course, we did move the conversation towards the adolescents. And the reality, this was informed by the older age group, 10 to 24, I believe. And at that age, I think we are skirting around the issues. Clearly, we are not really. There's something there that we intended to discuss at the beginning, but we've not been able to touch on. So again, Conrad and team may be encouraged to sort of see how we can deepen this conversation. And for that age group, I think the biggest issue is the economic issue, the underemployment, the lack of jobs, what's going on. From the president's office, I'll just let you know, tomorrow the president is launching something called Generation Unlimited. So please keep an eye on, log on if you can. And this is just a way of a platform to try get young people to work, to jobs, digital jobs, and all the sort of youth initiatives have been pulled together and crowded in one platform. So this is happening tomorrow afternoon, and please log on to that. That is trying to address the economic challenges that we've mentioned. So that my parting shot is really like to continue with having these conversations. I think understanding that everyone is coming from a good place, trying to sort out something. And like I discussed initially, the issue is around the coordination. How do we work together? How do we bring these policies and listen to each other? It's not one way is wrong, one way is right, but then there's a place for listening. There's a place for including young people. I always say they're not props. Young people are not people you just bring to an event for them to give a speech and a shairi, and that is their contribution to the discussions. They need to be part of the decision making from the design of the program. So we cannot be designing programs for them and including them, but then how do we bring them so that they're actually designing the programs from scratch? If I'm saying I'm doing research, are they taking the research? Are they the planning? Are they the ones contributing to the questions being asked? Because if not, we are still speaking for them and coming up with solutions for them rather than involving them.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thanks for being here today. Rosemary?
Thank you, Stella. Before I give my parting shot, I just want to respond to the statement of parenting not being a democracy. Yes, it's not a democracy, but even the Bible says, do not spare a road and spoil a child. So a parent, no parent on earth would want to see his or her 10-year-old carrying a child or their children themselves. So parents, we just need to make a deliberate decision on when to give a lollipop and when to spank the child, because we are talking about the future of the world, the future of Kenya. So we really need to look at it more critically rather than just superficially. Secondly, I would like to echo Wangui Kamau's comment on teenage pregnancy not just being about contraception. I fully agree. It's about a supportive environment, an environment that is supportive across the continuum of this young person's growth. So it's about information, it's about parenting, it's about policies that are working for them, it's about everything. And contraception is just a last resort. And I'm saying last resort because we know that there are those ones that will definitely have sex even after we've done all we can. So contraception becomes a last resort. And so Kenya is a signatory to very many important treaties, including the just ended ICPD +25. And there's a very, very key commitment that Kenya made. And this was on access for all adolescents and youth, especially girls, and to comprehensive and age-appropriate responsive information, education, and it goes on, and it's beautiful. However, are we honoring the commitment? Because that would be the problem for me. 2, the UHC conversation talks about this. No one is to be left behind. How are we ensuring that our young adolescents and young adults are not being left behind? We can only have this happen if, from where I sit in an organization that empowers young people to advocate for their sexual reproductive health and rights every day, because we know that our policies are enshrined in all these best practices that we are talking about. They are fantastic, they are good. if they're implemented the way they ought to be, then we should, people like us would close shop, because then we wouldn't have young voices advocating for SRHR rights that are actually due to them. So what am I saying? I'm saying, let us listen to the young people. Listen to them. Let's hear their story. We think we know what is good for them. We think we know what they want. But evidently, from the clips we played, we are lost. We do not really know what they mean. We think we know what they have meant, but that is not what they meant. So let's listen to them. Give them a voice and let them echo their sentiments. 2, let us ensure that they have access to information. Information that is authentic, information that will help them make good decisions, because they will get information, but are they getting the right information? So let's have access to information. And also, after they have information, they will be empowered. So what? Let us ensure that youth-friendly services are available all over the country, that these young people can access, because you've told me that I could walk in and have information from a health provider. I want to walk in a friendly manner that is not stigmatizing me for what has brought me there. So let us have youth-friendly services also available to these young people so that they're able to get this information. And finally, access to commodities. When we talk about contraception, we're not just talking about pills and etc. And it's not just about pregnancy prevention, it's about also disease prevention. So let us also ensure that commodities are available of choice to these young people, and then we give them the right information. Just like a woman would go to an MCH department and you ask for a modern method of contraception and you're taken through a few, then you make that decision. Let these children also have that. We are seeing children abuse postnatal, this is the morning pill. It's because that's all they know. So they get it, they use it, their boyfriends give them, they get for themselves. Why? Because they do not have the right information. So let us give them information, avail services to them that are friendly without stigma, so that we listen to them and be able to support them.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and thanks for being part of this conversation. Dr. Mwoka?
So thank you again for having this conversation. I think I'm also learning a lot, and the comments, I'm taking a lot and learning a lot from the comments and the chats. I think I'll bring it back to the age group, 18 to 24, that we were hearing in the voices of the youth. And this idea of consent, also we've been talking about over and over again. And I think even up to now, the definition and understanding of what consensual sex is, we are also not sure if that's something that's very well understood, or what consent means. Is it freely given? And I think I like this mnemonic, it's phrase that tries to break down what consent means. And it means that it's freely given, that there is no manipulation. It means that it's reversible. That means that I can decide before we have sex or during sex, if I don't want, it's a no, it's a no. And that means we can be able to stop. It means it needs to be informed. And when we're talking about information, is that if we've discussed, for example, that we will use a condom, and then when we decide sex, but we do not use a condom, or my partner doesn't use a condom, that is not informed consent. So that is not consensual. It needs to be enthusiastic. That means that I need to be able to do, you both need to be doing what you want to do, and not just what the other person wants you to do. And it needs to be also be specific, that if I say I want, let's say, for example, if it's specific, you specify that if it's making out, it's making out is not equivalent to sex. Those are two very different things. And I think I'm bringing this out because sometimes when you talk to young people, and I've had conversations with young people, whereby once you start digging down in terms of the sexual encounters they've had, you realize that even as much as it's peers and they agree that it's something consensual, not all of them even fully understand what the consequences of sex are. And I guess that's where we keep alluding and we keep emphasizing on the aspect of information. Not all of them know how to protect themselves. So I think we need to bring in that aspect of information is key. Information, I don't think it can be overemphasized that information is key. I think another thing that we need to also consider is, especially now during this day and age, this framing of messages. And I think somebody addressed the issue of communication and IC materials, why we stop having them. And if you notice a lot of SRHR, sexual and reproductive health related mass communication ideas, the framing of the messages. If you look at the framing of the messages, so one, you notice most of them are very HIV focused. So it's always, when you're talking SRHR, it's often very HIV focused, and it's often, and it's focused on used condoms. And then it's also how the framing of the messages can be very, it's more of, it's a risk, it's dangerous, it's wrong, rather than it doesn't take, the tone of the messaging, I think, needs to be very well understood, especially when you're communicating with young people. And I think this is something we're seeing even across, whether in media, traditional or social media, whereby I saw on Facebook 2 days ago, the Funga Miguu initiative, which was being started by Kajiado County. And if I'm a young person and I see Funga Miguu initiative, what message am I sending, especially to young girls? Because you notice that most of the messages which are out there when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health tend to victimize young girls. And it takes away, and I think Kennedy mentioned this, it takes away the responsibility of men and boys in terms of them. They're also part of this process. So we've reached a point where we're constantly victimizing young girls, whether adolescents or young girls above the age of 18 to 24, to a point where we're sort of bringing in a culture of silence, where, because everything that comes out of there, that is shown out there, it's to victimize them, to make them feel like they are the reason why the bad things are happening to them. So then, if you're shameful and you know that there's no one to talk to, there's no place you can seek a safe space, then we just be silent. So even if I am interested in having sex and I want to actually ask my mother or my doctor or my community member, what do I need to consider? I don't have the courage to be able to do that. So I think there's a lot that we need to consider when we're talking about young people. And again, I agree completely with Wangui that there are many root causes that we need to also discuss. And poverty is one of those root causes. Education, access to restrictive laws and policies, these social-cultural norms. We've not even addressed the issue of gender inequality, which can also be a whole conversation to have, and how, as young people, and I think this also has been shown that young people, so a research was done among high school students, and they were asked about consent. And what was interesting is you find that both young boys and young girls in high school mentioned that it's if a girl says no to sex, what they really mean is yes. That's the notion that they're growing up with. Ni kujifanya tu lakini anataka. That's what you will hear. So I think there's a lot that we need to go back, to step back and just really understand them. Like Rosemary said, we really need to understand, and we need to understand that it keeps changing and we need to keep relearning and learning. I think we need to also be very careful in terms of how we frame our messages in different channels that we're using. And I think especially now during COVID-19, and we've already had that young people are engaging in sex with multiple partners without protection. I think now even more we need to make sure that we have access to that information. So the government has those IC materials everywhere for COVID. Maybe this is also an opportune moment to make sure we have those IC materials talking about comprehensive sexuality education, or how to use a condom, and also how to, and I think Julie mentioned this as well, innovative ways for service delivery, whether it's mobile health clinics, where they can be able to continue accessing these contraceptives, using mobile health, using telehealth, talk to the doctors over the phone for them to be able to advise you what is the right contraceptive method to use if I need to use a contraceptive method.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was quite comprehensive. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. Dr. Kabiru, Caroline?
Essentially, I wanted to speak to, I think someone had raised the issue about contraceptives is giving young people a license. But actually, I want us to take a step back and think about education being power. So talking to a young person about sex does not make them go out and have sex. Telling young people about contraceptives does not necessarily mean that they're sexually active. But when and if they decide to have sex, then they have the right information at hand. I would say my parting shot then is that addressing young people's sexual and reproductive health is not a sprint. It is a marathon. It takes collective action. It's going to be something that's a long, it means that we need to take time to strategize, to see what's out there, to talk to different stakeholders, design those programs, and continually monitor what we're doing. I've seen a lot of conversations about moral or religion or moral stance, and for me, I say, at least from a public health perspective, I cannot judge another person based on my own religious beliefs. I have to recognize that people out there have different religious beliefs. Some of them maybe don't even have a religious belief. So I don't speak about morals. I speak about what it is I want to change. I want teenage pregnancies to be done. It's not a moral argument for me necessarily. Personally, it may be, but when I'm speaking to other young people, I can't bring it up because I don't know what is going on in their mind. Is that girl having sex because she needs a pad and that's why she got pregnant? Where is the moral argument in that? So I think we need to just be clear that it is not our own personal beliefs. We just need to think about the young person and what's in their best interest and provide them with that enabling environment that enables them and empowers them to make the right decisions. And we trust that they will make those decisions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caroline. Thank you. Conrad?
For me, I think that the gap that exists is that there are no marketing campaigns that are communicating information around responsible sex and reproductive health for young adults, and also abstinence for the younger ones. They are on Instagram, they are on TikTok, but social organizations are not there, and they have not found or learned how to leverage on this media. So I think we need to start being comprehensive. The days of tumechill when we were growing up, and I think HIV and AIDS used to help a lot, because that is when we got ourselves talking about it because of HIV and AIDS. When HIV and AIDS was pulled away, so all the campaigns around sex and sex education and around responsible sex, it's like it all dropped. The purpose disappeared or was pulled out, so everything crumbled. I think we have to find a way to reach them and reach in these spaces that we have not, social sectors haven't found, they have not understood the way of getting in.
All right, thank you so much, Conrad. And actually, thank you for having this conversation, beginning the conversation, and we hope it will go on. First, I'd like to thank everybody who showed up for this conversation, finding time to come, finding even the energy to share what you think. I see people like Paul Otieno, Ashira, keeping on sharing their comments. Thank you so much, guys. And we promise that these are not going to just, pass. It's something that is informing a great conversation. And thank you so much to our panelists for finding the time, for sharing what they have, their expertise and knowledge. And we all hope that this conversation is going to take us to a better level, to a better place as a country, as a community, as a region. Yeah? I think I'd like to end by going back to what Dr. Caroline Kabiru said, that this is about being very clear about our goal and having a well-coordinated strategy. It's not about one stakeholder. It's not about one community. It's not about one religion or one denomination. We all are supposed to be on the table, and we all must voice our issues. Let's listen to young people. Let's remind ourselves as parents, yeah, that we have a role, yeah, that we recognize that policy, culture, research all have a part to play. And when we do that, we'll have a well-coordinated strategy. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you're watching us from. Asanteni sana. Goodbye.